Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in today. We want to welcome you to the Jernix Project Execute webinar. Today's webinar is entitled How to Accelerate Executive Support for Project Success, with our guest speaker, Michael Obrochta, who is the president of Zoser Inc. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar today. We respect your time, and therefore we plan to have you back working productively here in just under an hour. My name is James Bronner. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Jernix, and we appreciate you spending time with us today, learning more about how to accelerate the executive support, which is a big issue for many of you project managers out there for your project success. Now, a couple of housekeeping items before we get cranking the day. First, you can receive a full PDU for attendance at today's webinar. Real simple how you can accomplish receiving your PDU certificate. Just respond to the follow-up email that we'll be sending out either end of the day today or first thing tomorrow. And what we'll do is if you'll just say, hey, I want to get my PDU certificate and reply to that email, then we'll just create those, PDF them, and get them back to you. Give us a couple of days. Because at time it's a bit of a time-taking process. And then Michael would like you to ask questions during today's presentation. So I would encourage you to use the questions tab there in the GoToWebinar panel. Click on that as Michael covers items that are, and he's going to cover a lot today because he typically does. I call it drinking from a fire hose when you listen to Mike speak. Go ahead and type in your questions. I'll collect those. If it makes sense to interject those in the middle of the presentation, we'll do so. Otherwise, we'll collect those and see how many of those we can get to at the end during the Q&A time. So our agenda, quite straightforward. First, Michael Obrochta will take us through today's webinar, and then we'll begin responding to your submitted Q&As. So without further ado, let me hand over the reins to Michael Obrochta.
Thank you, James. Now, for the moment, I'm going to assume that each and every one of you in the audience is a world-class project manager who understands and uses all the best practices in the PMBOK and from elsewhere. In fact, there are no project managers anywhere who are more skilled and experienced than you. Congratulations, you're the best of the best. In fact, I'm honored to be able to speak with you. Do you know, there's just one problem, though. You cannot succeed. Your projects are doomed to fail. Why? Because you cannot do it alone. You are dependent on your executive. And you cannot succeed with your projects unless you get your executive to act for project success. And your executive needs help from you to take these actions. Well, I want you to know this is absolutely a favorite subject of mine, and it is a good news story. At this point, I've had the good fortune of speaking at every North American Global Congress for PMI for the past decade, and I've spoken at countless other global congresses around the world, Europe, Asia, Latin America, countless PMI chapter and regional events. And I am delighted to speak to you today. Now, all of these presentations, there has been a common theme for me, and that theme has been project success. You know, I'm fascinated by achieving project success. And really, I'm fascinated by helping others achieve project success. So that's what we'll do today. Today, we'll explore an increasingly important aspect of project success. I'll discuss how you, as project managers, can accelerate executive support for your projects so they can achieve success. Now, it turns out much is known about the important role that executives play in project success. And much is known about how the project manager can actually get these executives to act for project success. Fortunately for us, authors and practitioners have been seriously engaged in this subject for the last decade. So what I've done, I've drawn for a number of references, including a couple of recent studies, and I draw your attention to the list at the end of the companion paper upon which this presentation is based. Now, I want you to know that I've provided James copies of the companion paper, and I believe he'll be happy to make those available to you upon request. And what I've done is I've blended the wisdom from these many, many sources with my experience and opinions. And I want you to know that I spent 3+ decades in project management, managing hundreds and hundreds of projects, and probably managing just as many project managers. And I spent much of that time as a senior project manager at the CIA. At one point, I led a program to mature the project management practices of the CIA agency-wide. And I developed and managed an internal certification program, and it involved thousands of project managers every year. I've since gone on to help build the first ever U.S. government project management certification. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to blend those experiences and those observations and those interactions with those project managers with those studies and research. Now, I want you to know this material is for project managers. And it's really not just for any project managers. It's for project managers who are interested in undertaking change, the type of change that results in improving the workplace environment. And I'm going to give you a how-to list toward the end of the presentation, a how to do it. Well, I hope you find that this is going to be an interesting presentation. And along the way, I'm going to include a new measurement model that's been developed that I'll draw your attention to help you accelerate your success. In sequence, then, we'll examine the problem, look at a little background about why the role of executives is so important in project management and why it's changed so much over the recent years. I'll review some approaches that you as world-class project managers can take to get your executives to take these actions. As I mentioned, I'll draw some recent studies, provide some insights into what drives project success, and I'll include the handy-dandy what-to-do list. Now, I do want to negotiate an agreement with you for the next hour. The agreement is that if I promise to be informative, interesting, and perhaps even occasionally entertaining, if I promise to do that, I'd like you to promise to be attentive and to participate and ask questions. As James said, I'd love questions at any time, and he'll collect those and interject when he thinks it's best. So do we have a deal? I'll take that as a virtual yes, since I can't see you. Really, together, I do think that this is a good news story. Now, I want to tell you about George. And George is the name of a fictitious project manager, but nonetheless, this is a story about characteristics that I've seen many, many project managers have. And so I'll refer to the project manager in the story as George, or even Georgette. After spending that career at the CIA in project management, and after continuing to work with so many other project managers from around the government and the country, I came across a study not long ago, in 2008. It was by the Council for Excellence in Government. And it was about program and project managers. And you know what it said? It said that 60 to 90% of them do not get the level of executive support they need. 60 to 90%. Well, in addition to that, I'm pleased to call Jim Johnson a friend. You may know Jim. He's the founder and chairman of the Standish Group. And he's been studying the IT side of project management for decades. He's the author of the well-known Chaos Reports. Many of you might refer to those. And in the 2006 edition of the Chaos Reports, we can see that according to Jim's research, 65% of projects are still outright failures or challenged. It's to the point where they don't meet time, cost, and performance. So as most of us know, project success is somewhat uncommon. Now I've kept reading, and I want to draw your attention to a global workforce study. That was conducted by the Towers Parent Organization. You might know them. They're a professional services firm, and they help organizations improve performance. This study was the largest of its kind anywhere in the world. It involved 90,000 people in 18 countries, and look what it found. The same thing. 3/4 of the folks surveyed said senior managers don't do enough to help. In other words, we, even as world-class project managers, are more often than not left on our own. You know, I think these statistics are linked, and I think that we need look no further than ourselves to find this linkage. When I ran that program at the CIA to certify and train thousands of project managers every year, and when I go to conferences and ask project managers how they like the training classes they might have taken, I frequently hear some version of the same statement. You know, Mike, I wish my boss could have taken this class. Well, that does it for me. That tells me that many, many project managers are looking toward their bosses, toward their executives for help. What do you think? Do you think that kind of reflects your workplace environment? Do you think there's a George in your workplace environment that returns from one of these training classes? Or a Georgette that when she returns, she tries to practice some world-class best practice technique? Maybe she's having trouble with authority and responsibility, and maybe she comes back and tries to use a charter. What a great technique. Many of the classes and trainings available to us teach us about project charters. They teach us about how helpful it can be to have a charter when we're having issues with authority and responsibility. But when George or Georgette returns, they want to apply this best practice technique, and they find that the place they work responds as follows. Hey, George or Georgette, we don't do that here. That's not part of our practices. You're going to have to figure out how to succeed without us supporting your need to have a charter. Right, well, if you're beginning to buy my story that we need help from executives, then I want to walk you through a timeline. I want you to understand the causes for why this is happening to us and why it's happening to so many of us. We saw the studies, 60, 90% of us feel this way. And the causes include the fact that success, as it's defined in project management, the success definition has expanded. So let's look at a history lesson. In the beginning, I call that the 1960s here, projects were judged mostly by a single criteria. Did it work? Well, at the CIA, I spent much of my career in what you may know from the James Bond movies as Q. I was Q. I was the guy who developed all the spy gadgets for the secret agents. So for me, in the 60s, when the technical performance criteria was applied, I was judged whether my project succeeded or not, on whether it worked. In other words, did the microphone secretly pick up a conversation? Well, time moved on, and I show that as the 1970s here, and we have something that we call the triple constraint. We're now being judged by 3 criteria: time, cost, and quality. Wasn't just enough for it to work. Well, at the CIA, that criteria began to be applied to me to judge my successes or failures. So then I would be judged by, could we get that listening device built in time for the foreign ambassador's visit, and could we afford to build several of them? Well, time marched on again, and I show that as the 1980s here. And a 4th constraint was added: the customer. Now it's time, cost, quality, and customer acceptance. For me, back at the CIA, it was something like this. Mike, I don't care that you delivered all the listening devices we asked for on schedule. I don't care that they can pick up a whisper from across the room. Do you know what, Mike? They're just too big to secretly install inside a table leg. We're not going to use them. Well, oh my gosh. I met all the requirements, but now somebody's telling me the customer's not happy. All right. Now then, time marches on again, and I show that as the 1990s and beyond. Complexity, organizational culture, impact to our workplace. These have now expanded to be part of the definition of success. We're judged by criteria that extend beyond the immediate bounds of our project. Hey, Mike, you know that audio device that you developed? Yeah, on time, on schedule, on cost, worked perfectly. Mike, did it collect anything of national security priority? I don't know. How do I know? That's not my point. I'm a project manager. It's too bad, Mike. If you can't develop audio devices that pick up intelligence that's of the highest levels, what good are your projects? All right. I'm going to mention the fact that complexity for many of our projects has also expanded. In the early days, I could build one listening device, and I was judged as successful. Toward the end of my career, one was not enough. There had to be networks of globally connected, interdependent listening devices, all controllable from any workstation in the CIA anywhere in the world. Complexity. And then lastly, many of us feel this every day. There are just more and more projects for us. In fact, Tom Peters, what a recognized expert on management. Tom Peters has gone so far to say that he thinks all work is project work. All right, you get the idea? Success, at least according to my research, is harder now to achieve than it's ever been before. See that we now have a dependency on achieving something that's harder than ever before, success, and the dependency we have is on our executive. Now, I want you to know that when I use the term executive, I'm broadly defining that term. It's someone in our organization who's responsible for the business end of things. It could be an individual or a group, could be a person or a function. It's just someone who's close enough to the business end to get stuff done that we need done as project managers, stuff we can't get done on our own. All right? And why? Well, as I've mentioned, it's tough on us now. It's tougher than ever before. So we need the help. The success we crave is dependent upon our executives. And do you know what? What better place to start when dealing with executives than to sit down and tell them what we need them to do? Dear executive, I'd like you to act on a few things from this list. Signed, dedicated project manager. It's a great list. You can get together with any group of project managers who have a little experience and ask them what help they need from the executives, and you're going to get a list. Well, this is my list. This is from the research that I've done and from the project managers I've talked to, and it's not a bad list. In fact, what I encourage you to do is I encourage you to perhaps start with this list when you're thinking about that conversation with an executive. Start with this list and maybe tailor it to suit your situation. Now, there are a couple authors that I'll call your attention to. And again, they're mentioned at the back end of the companion paper. Randy England and Gary Herkins have been writing about these kind of actions for years. And they've had great success getting traction with this subject. and I hope you have traction with this subject as well. So I'm not going to go through every item on the list, but I am going to pick one or two. One or two. If you have a preference, let James know, and I can pick one or two that you match your preference. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick one or two on my own and chat about them, just to give you an idea of what executive actions we would like as world-class project managers to get taken. Let's see. Here's the number 2. Pick the right projects. All right. So I'm assuming, and I told you I was assuming, that you are world-class project managers. Well, you should assume I am too, all right? Well, the last thing I want to work on is the wrong project. I want to work on a project that's perfectly matched to my skills, interests, and ability. In fact, I want to work on a project that's going to succeed. Do you know why? Because at the end of the day, my performance as a project manager is judged quite a bit based on whether my project succeeded. Hey, Mike, I see the last 3 projects you worked on didn't succeed. Well, hey, Mike, nice going. I see the last 3 projects you worked on did succeed. We're judged by that. Well, most of us don't have the luxury of picking the projects for ourselves. Most of us are assigned projects. And for my purposes, I'm putting the responsibility for that assignment on the executive. I want the executive to assign the right projects to me. All right, let's take a look at another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. Fifth one. Ensure projects follow a documented plan. All right, now we all know planning is important. Remember, we're world-class project managers. The problem is that many of the places we work do not feel they have the quote-unquote luxury of time or luxury of money to have us do adequate planning. Well, as a world-class project manager, I know that if I do adequate planning, I'm more likely to succeed. So I want to work somewhere that's going to let me do that. I want to sit down and chat with my executive about how critical planning is to my success and the success of projects. And I'd like them to take the appropriate action. Give me enough time. Give me enough money to plan. All right, and on down the list. And one I won't talk about, but it's a fun one if you want to read the paper. The last one on the list. I'd like the executive to behave like an executive and ask the right questions. And there's a nice little half a dozen questions in the paper that I want executives to ask me about. And in fact, it's such a good list. I've had executives that I coach. I do executive coaching. I have had executives that I coach tell me that they've taken that little list and taped it on the back of their employee badge. And every once in a while when they're sitting across the table from a project manager, you know what they do? They look at the back of their badge and they ask the project manager the right questions. Anyhow, it's a good list. So the good news here is that the actions we as world-class project managers want our executives to take, the actions are known. I mean, you can use the list I've got, or you can make up your own list, or blend the two together. But the actions are largely known. We know pretty much what help we need in order to achieve project success. The problem, though, the problem is even the most progressive project managers who really are genuinely interested in achieving project success, even the most progressive executives who are genuinely interested in achieving project success. Well, the problem is that's easier said than done. Even these executives have barriers to achieving project success. Even if they want to act on the list we give them, they've got barriers in their way. Fortunately, though, the barriers faced by the executives, they're well understood too. So let's just take a look at a couple of them. Executives, just like us, they work in organizational environments that impose limitations and challenges. All right? Just like us. One of the challenges are that the change readiness level in an organization might be low. Well, what's a change readiness level? Well, it's a little simple chart here. It's the level of interest and the level of readiness an organization is for instituting a change. Hey, Mike, look, I'm the executive. I hear that you want more time for planning and more resources for planning. Mike, I believe that's important. As your executive, I want that to happen. But you know what, Mike? I can't put that kind of change in place around here now. This is not the right time. We need to wait a little while, right? So change readiness level. He or she, as an executive, may work in an organization where it's not the right time to pick one of those items from the list. We need to be sensitive to that. Another barrier they face is, you know what? These executives, they work in the same dysfunctional organization as we do. The same dysfunctional organization. It's no better or worse for them than it is for us. Many of our organizations, shown here on this maturity scale, many of them operate down at the low end of the scale, level 1 or perhaps even level 2. At those levels, yeah, we occasionally succeed with projects, but when we do, it's due more to heroics than anything else. Well, same for the executives. If we want them to, let's say, allow us to do more planning, give us more resources to do more planning, it's tough for the executive to carve out those resources in a organization that's low on the maturity scale. He'll have a hard time justifying that extra money for planning because a low maturity organization doesn't really appreciate planning as much as other organizations. All right? So the executive has got barriers. A couple of the other barriers, politics and limited authority. Look, there are agendas out there in the workplace that the executive has to deal with. We call those agendas politics. He or she may or may not have to make a decision that's counter to the best interests of what we need as project managers. Hey, let's face it, that's just the way it is. And likewise, executives, they don't hold all the cards. They have limited authority and limited resources. All right? So let's pause. Let's pause. We, as world-class project managers, we want to succeed. Well, we know success is tougher than ever before. Okay. And though we know that there are actions we can get our executive to take for success. Ah, good. Yeah, there's a few barriers the executives have to deal with. All right. All right. What are we going to do then? Now that we understand this, what are we going to do? Are we to passively sit by knowing all of this, or are we going to take an active role? Well, the rest of this presentation is for those of you who decide you want to take an active role. All right? An active role means that you, as a world-class project manager, want to work to help improve the environment, not just for your project, but for all the projects in your organization. You, as a world-class project manager, are going to be active in helping your executive overcome those barriers we talked about, and helping your executive take the actions that he or she can take to help us achieve project success. We, as an active world-class project manager, we understand that the success of our projects is largely beyond the control of what we can do alone. We understand that we, as world-class project managers, will apply great project management techniques, and we also understand that there are a lot of fuzzy things associated with the projects we work on. They're incompletely defined, the scope might be fuzzy, and success criteria might even be fuzzy. But you know what? as active world-class project managers, we've now considered this to be the scope of our duties. The scope of our duties. We are no longer satisfied at being what's listed here as passive. We're no longer satisfied working only within the bounds of our project environment. We're no longer being satisfied accepting the limitations of the executive or the workplace. Oh no. We're no longer satisfied using only the traditional project management guide techniques. And we're no longer satisfied working only on well-defined projects. All right? So, the world-class active project manager is now focused intently on helping the executive do what the executive needs to do. And let's take a look. We know that the executives had varying levels of ability and interest in overcoming the barriers we've talked about. We know active project managers, we can size up the situation. Size up the situation and then tailor actions to help the executive. And we believe once we do this, this is going to accelerate getting that support we need. All right. Now here's where I'm going to introduce a measurement model. It's a model that we as world-class project managers can use to kind of size up the situation and figure out how to proceed, how to be that active project manager. I want to pause just for a moment and just mention a word about measurement models. And I want you to understand that measurement models are a very, very well-established approach for deciding what to do or what not to do in an organizational setting. And I want to point out to you the use that we can make of measurement models. All right? Background, I'll introduce you to a measurement that likely you've been introduced to before. This is the managerial grid. Many of us recognize this as coming from Blake and Mouton. Many of us actually use this, whether consciously or unconsciously, when we size up the organization we work in. On one scale, we show the concern for getting the work done. On the other scale, we show the concern for people. We all work for executives that we consider to be people managers. Sometimes we've all worked for executives that we all consider to be task managers. Well, all that comes from this grid. All right? So even if you don't recognize the grid, you've probably benefited from thinking about executives using a model like this. Let's just take a quick look at the model, just to get the speed on the use of model. This is a leadership model, strength deployment index. And on this we can characterize the leadership characteristics of either our executives or ourselves. It's another good model for sizing up a situation before action gets taken. One last model, just to give you an introduction to models. This is the transformational leadership model. And this is similar to what I've been talking about, and we want to be active project managers, active to change our organizational culture. Others sometimes refer to that as transformational leadership. We're going to get out in front now, those of us that are listening intently to this conversation. We're going to get out in front and transform our organizations to be more capable of supporting our needs to achieve project success. All right. Now I want to get to the model that's been developed just for a model that can be used to gauge the executive support for projects. Now I'm going to leave this model up for a minute. I want us to get familiar with it. Executive support for projects model. All right, let's look at the scales. On the scale on the lower axis, we have the executive ability scale. That's a scale where we can gauge how able the executive is to take the actions we want taken. How able the executive is. And then the other scale, on the other axis, the executive attitude scale. Yeah, how willing is the executive to take the actions? So a pretty simple scale. One axis is ability, and the other axis is attitude. Attitude. So then I've drawn quadrants just to give us an easy way to talk about this model. Let's look at the quadrant in the lower left-hand corner, and that's labeled obstacle. Well, in that quadrant, we have behavior that is pretty much an obstacle for us. It's behavior characterized by someone who has very, very low levels of attitude. In fact, the attitude could be called counteractive. They're really not interested in helping us. In fact, they're interested perhaps in counteracting us. And they also low ability. So they don't know much and they don't want to help. Obstacle. Let's look at the upper right, though. That's the best case, probably, to find ourselves working with executives like that. They know a high ability. They know a lot about project management. They know a lot about changing organizational culture. They know a lot. And look, they also have a proactive attitude. They really do like getting out in front of problems. Well, we call this quadrant the initiator. Executives are looking to initiate things. And then we have the two other quadrants. So now there's a model that we can quickly use to gauge or size up the executive support for projects. And I think we can use the model. And how can we use it? Let's pause and we'll take a look at information about how we can actually use this model. All right, well, here I'll just present it in a form. Do you see the left-hand column? Those are the same four quadrants we saw in the model. Initiator, inelegant, competitor, and obstacle. Those are the same four. And in the center column, we describe the executive behaviors that we would witness by an executive. And then in the right-hand column, and this is the key for us, that's what we can do. If we find ourselves dealing with an initiator with the behavior described, then we can do what's in the right-hand column. So we're going to pause now and take a look at this stuff. And let's see, which one should we look at? Let's look at the obstacle one. Let's say we find that we have an executive who has a counteractive attitude and really no project management ability. And executives like this, they have concern for agendas absolutely counter to what we need for project success. And they don't even have the benefit of they don't even have the benefit of understanding what we want for project success. They don't know much about projects. With these executives, there's a likelihood that they may have sort of somewhat random and unpredictable behavior, at least as we judge our needs as project managers. And that behavior may or may not really impact us. Well, if we're in a workplace environment where we have an executive that demonstrates this obstacle behavior, we can still do some things to accelerate their ability to help us achieve project success. We can do some things. And what we can do first and foremost is insulate our projects a little bit and build a little resilience to the executive. Hey, look, if they're going to do things that are counteractive, or if they're going to have actions that are unpredictable and could harm our projects, then then we can build up a little resilience and a little insulation from the executive. And we can form alliances with other more supportive executives. And then eventually we can work through, perhaps with this executive who's an obstacle, eventually we can kind of work through with them and maybe raise their knowledge level a little. All right? And maybe if we succeed at raising their knowledge level a little, and maybe if they see other executives helping, then they'll be less of an obstacle, and we will move them a little closer. We will accelerate them a little bit. I'll look at one of the other quadrants as well. Again, you can read about all of them in the paper, but the idea is that if you can use this model to sort of gauge your executive, then you've then sized up the situation and can pick one of these acceleration approaches. Let's see, which is the one we looked at earlier on the previous chart? I believe we looked at initiator. All right. Proactive attitude. A real pro at organizational project management and changing of organizational culture. A real concern for taking actions to help us with project success. A thorough knowledge of management, projects, and really motivated, highly motivated to look out in front and identify opportunities to help us. Well, you ask, what could be better? What could we possibly need to do to accelerate that? And the answer is, well, there are some things we could do to accelerate that. With an executive like that, full and open communications are the key. As world-class project managers, we know a lot of things about our projects, and we could share more and more of that with this kind of executive. We can keep them so well informed that they, with their high level of knowledge and high level of ability, they can then proactively come up with things to be done to help us. All right? All right, so now we've sized up our executives. We've used a model to size them up. And why? Why are we using a model? Why are we sizing up executives? Well, that's us in the left corner at the bottom. We're the project manager, and we want to get the cheese. The cheese. And how do we get the cheese? Well, we can continue wandering a difficult, torturous path on our own, or, as we've said in this presentation, we can get a little help from the executive and maybe make that success path a little easier to find. All right? Here's something I want you to know about executives. You know, after we've sized them up using the model, and after we've got that list of things we want the executives to do, do you know what? Do you know what? Executives are worried about success just like we are. They're worried about their own success. They're worried about being executive successes. And you know what? At least according to this research, the number one reason for executive not achieving success, the number one reason for executive failing is bad execution, not getting stuff done. Holy mackerel, Mike. Not getting stuff done. That's what we do. We're project managers. We get stuff done. Exactly. What a marriage made in heaven. We, as project managers, get stuff done. Executive, the number one reason they fail is not getting stuff done. Sit down with the executive when you've used the model. Sit down with the executive, and when you're accelerating them, sit down with the executive and benefit from the fact that there is a codependency here. Executives need us just as much as we need them. Interesting. You know, there was a statement by Andy Crow. And if you ever get the chance to hear Andy speak, you ought to take advantage. Andy talks about a survey he did of 5,000 project managers and their bosses and their customers. And, you know, he just asked them basically two questions. He says, what do you believe in? and what do you do? What do you believe in and what do you do? And then he grouped all the answers, all 5,000 responses. He grouped those into two categories. The ones he got from the top 2%, the best project managers, the most successful, the alphas, he put them in one category. And you know the responses from everyone else, the other 98%, the non-alphas, he put them in the other category. So let's pretend we're doing the survey now. Virtually, I want you to raise your hand virtually if you think planning is important in project management. Well, of course, we all raise our hand. We all know planning is important. We're world-class project managers. Well, Andrew's study, he found the same thing. But then he asked, how much do you do? How much planning do you do? And you know what? The alphas, the world-class project managers, the best of the best, they did twice as much planning as everyone else. Twice as much. Well, how can this be? They work in the same dysfunctional organizations. They work for the same types of executives we work for. They're craving executive support just like we are, yet the alphas do twice as much planning. Interesting. Same thing for communicating. We all know that communicating is a critical skill in project management. All of us know that. Same with the alpha study. All of the project managers surveyed knew that. But only the alphas did twice as much. So, a lesson for us as we're dealing with executives, a lesson for us as we're trying to get our executives to take actions, a lesson for us is to behave like an alpha. Do what we already know is associated with the top 2% best of the best project managers. One more thing, as we're working with executives, one more thing is to understand and use the power that we have as project managers. Power, genuine power that we have. No, it's not the power that comes from rank or title or official authority. No, project managers usually don't have that. In fact, if you look at an organizational chart, we're usually somewhere near the bottom. So we don't have that kind of power. But you know what? We've got other powers. We have informational power. We are the world's leading expert on our projects. And we can use that type of power. Now think about someone who used that type of power. Back in the 1970s popular TV show series, MASH. That was a series about doctors and surgeons set in the Korean War. You know, we had people in that show who had official titles like doctors or colonels. But you know what? The most powerful person in that show, it wasn't any of them. It was the clerk. It was Radar. Radar had the most power in that show. Why? He knew stuff. He had information that no one else had. So do you. You know stuff that no one else has. You can use what you know to develop a little bit of power. And once you develop a little bit of power, you can begin to use that to convince your executive to take those actions that you want taken. In fact, once you develop a little bit, I want you to amplify a little bit. I mean, what's better, one project manager with a little bit of power and a list for the executive, or 2 project managers, or 10 project managers? I think there's a benefit to having some numbers here. So you could form a council, a project management council. Get together with a couple other project managers, just like you, a couple other project managers who want to change the workplace culture so all projects are more successful. A couple project managers just like you who want to help the executive take some actions. Form some kind of council. That doesn't have to be official. It could be over lunch. There's nothing better than getting together with a couple project managers talking about the workplace environment. Okay? Now I'm going to give you the list. This is sort of a one-page list of most of what's in the presentation now. Sort of a short one-page. So what I want you to do as world-class project managers who want to accelerate the executive support for their projects, what I want you to do is in the left-hand column. And how I want you to do it is in the right-hand column. Now I've told you, we've talked about this stuff. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4. Behave like an alpha. That's what I want you to do. And how do you do that? Well, since the number one reason for executive failure is bad execution, I want you to recognize the dependence that executives have on us. And I want you to act like you have enough authority. I want you to communicate often. I want you to do enough planning. I want you to behave like an alpha. Let's look at another one, the power. What do I want you to do? I want you to understand power and use it. Use it. Use it for the good of your organization. Use it to motivate your executive. How do you do that? Use the sources of expert or informational power that you have. Use that to influence people. Use it to influence your executive. Last one on the list we mentioned as well. Amplify your power by forming a project management council. Get together with some others. Put a few of your names down on the list, not just yours. All right. Let's reflect back on the key points then. We've covered a lot of ground. I've told you that there's a companion paper available to you if you want to read at more length about what we've talked about. You've seen a short one-page how-to list. That's also in the companion paper. And as you reflect on the topic, you'll recall that we talked about how times have changed. We talked about how success is so much harder in project management now than it's ever been before. So much harder. The definition's expanded. There's more projects. We talked about how much more dependent we are now than ever before on our executive. And then we recognize the good news. The good news is that the actions we want taken by our executive, they're known. We can have a list. Dear executive, please take some actions. The other good news is that there are barriers to the executive taking those actions that are known. We know the barriers. We know the actions. As active project managers, we're going to then get engaged. We're going to work to break down those barriers and help the executive take those actions. I've offered you a model. It's a pretty handy model, the executive support model. We can use that to sort of size up the environment that our executives are working in and size up the executive. Look at their attitude and their ability. We can then begin behaving like an alpha, using the power that we have and amplifying the power that we have. And at the end of the day, I believe that together, the project manager and the executive can achieve project success. Now here's where we'll pause for some questions and answers that may have come to mind, and I'll rely on James to bring those to my attention. All right, well, at this point, I'm not hearing any questions relayed to me by James. So what I'll do then is I'll close by telling you how genuinely interested in my professional relationships.
Hey, Mike, my apologies. I think I got disconnected there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, James, thank you.
Hey, there's a couple of questions that have come through. My apologies for interrupting you. We've got a few folks that have sent questions across, and if you've not done so already, go ahead and click the questions tab, send your question across. Our first question comes in from Praveen. Praveen says, in reference to your statement of behave like an executive, do you suggest, he says, do you have any suggestions on how to confront an executive when they are not behaving correctly, but in a way that's appropriate?
I do, and I use my favorite words in project management in situations like that. And my favorite words are, I will let you know the impact. So if I'm finding that an executive is behaving in a way that runs counter to my needs for project success, I'll find a way politely to let the executive know the impact. And I'll put the impact in terms that are meaningful for the executive. Maybe it's terms related to a strategic goal that the executive has. So I'll let you know the impact. Dear executive, look, you're acting in this way, and I want you to know that the impact of that is as follows. And then we can begin the discussion about how we might adjust the action to minimize or change the impact. I hope that answer helped your questioner.
Yeah, that was pretty straightforward. Thanks. That should help Praveen out. Our next question comes in from, looks like Garvin. Garvin says, how does one form an alliance with other executives without causing friction with your own executive?
Yeah, excellent question, because we acknowledge that our organizations have politics, and in some organizations, forming alliances outside the one you have with your own executive can be viewed in a negative way. So excellent question, and the answer is we can only do it in an environment where this alliance is not going to be seen in a negative way. So we might do it over a common cause or a common issue that our executive has. In other words, we might go to some third-party executive and say, look, I'm working on behalf of an issue that's important to my executive, and I would like to incorporate your help. So this way your alliance is built on serving the needs of your executive first. And then perhaps after that alliance with the third executive is formed, perhaps there'll be a comfort level then in introducing into the discussion something that you need done as a world-class project manager. Thank you for the question. I hope that helped, and if it didn't help enough, feel free to submit a follow-up here.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that should help out Garvin. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and submit your questions. If for some reason we run out of time today, I'm going to leave the session open for a few extra minutes, give you a chance to go ahead and submit the questions that you were not able to get responded to. We'll see if we can get some answers for those. Our next question comes in from Paul. Paul asks a question. He says, how do you get middle management buy-in, in particular for highly functional organizations? Any suggestions there, Mike?
I do, and I'll acknowledge that middle management in many of our organizations has I think, gotten a bad rap. In fact, they're unaffectionately referred to at times as the cement layer, the impenetrable layer where actions don't go up or down. And I take the counter view. I love to engage middle management. And in the paper, I point to some PMI-sponsored research about middle management actions for project success. And I'll summarize that research so briefly, and thank you for the question. I'll summarize it briefly here and then point you to the references in my paper. Middle managers at the end of the day are just as interested in success as the rest of us. So the key in working with them is to appreciate their agendas first. Appreciate their agendas first. Be supportive of their agendas first, and then introduce something from our agenda, introduce an action that we need taken. But it's a tough position in many organizations to be a middle manager, and I am so thankful that PMI has done the research to allow us to engage effectively with middle managers. And I'm sorry I couldn't do justice. That's a whole nother hour-long presentation, so thank you for the question.
Good point, Mike. Well, we're drawing to a close. I'm going to see if I can squeeze in one more question, because I did promise to keep you guys at just about an hour, and I want to keep that promise. Mike, our last question that we're going to have a chance to dig in today is from Marie. Marie says, I really like the idea of forming a PM council. but should we ask for permission so we don't appear to be sneaking around behind the executive's back?
Yeah, I think maybe you should. You're going to size up your environment first before you form a council. And if forming such a thing would be viewed as in a negative way, then of course you're going to seek permission first. But really, you can still probably have a conversation or two with some of your project management buddies, a conversation or two about this stuff without any risk at all. Remember, you're only doing this because you're interested in project success, and you know that your executive's success is linked to the outcome of our project. So you're doing this for only honorable reasons. Again, I'm sure I didn't expand enough on the answer given the short time frame, and offer you the opportunity to read just a little more about that in that paper.
Good. Well, I think that'll help Marie out significantly. And we've come to the end of our time. I do want to say thank you to Michael Obrachta for yet again a fantastic presentation. I've already had several people comment that they really want to have a copy of that paper, and I want to remind everyone on the line that we'll be happy to send that out if you'll just simply request that when you get our follow-up email. Just ask for a copy of that paper, and we'll be happy to send that out to you.
And James, let me interject the audience.
Sure.
Listen, audience. I do this because I like to be professionally involved, and nothing would please me more than to have some professional follow-up from you, either an email or a LinkedIn invitation. Okay? Thanks.
Good. Great. Yes. Please do connect with Mike via LinkedIn or by email. He would be more than happy to connect with you. In fact, my CEO sat down, had lunch with him recently, and said it was a fantastic experience. What do we do as a company, Jernix? Real simply, we help with cross-project resource optimization. So if you've got issues dealing with understanding who's doing what, when, who's available for the next project, really getting a handle of your resources, where they're at, what they're doing, and managing those in the context of getting your projects to execute correctly and successfully, that's kind of what we do. So feel free to visit our website. You can sign up for our weekly live demo on Wednesdays. I would also encourage you, since you all are all focused on managing projects and people, sign up for some of our other webinars. In addition to Mr. Obrachta, who presented today, we've got some fantastic folks lined up for the rest of this month, and we're beginning to build our list out for April as well. And got some titles on there about how to set up an enterprise PMO, how to recognize failing projects. The one that we just did yesterday was implementing an enterprise PMO for competitive advantage. One of my favorite was turning around failing projects. So I'd encourage you to visit our website there at projectexecute.com, and you can register for any of those webinars right on our website. Again, Mr. Obrachta and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We hope that the information provided will help you to really gain that executive support and push your projects across the finish line. Really do a better job of getting things done. Hope you have a wonderful day today. Thanks again for your attendance.